Welcome. Obviously, we're here for the Tech Talk. We've got 4 panelists here. We'll just go around and they can introduce themselves and introduce their career. Then I'll just ask them a few questions, and then I'll come round and give you the opportunity to ask questions as well. Maybe come and give you the mic, or I'll just listen and then ask again. We've got Chris, who's obviously remote. He's going to struggle to hear you, so that's why we need to pass the mic around. We'll start off first with Matt. Do you want to introduce yourself and then your career as well?
Lovely, yeah. Morning, everyone. My name is Matt Wyatt. I left this illustrious place in 1999, I believe. Does it say that on my badge? Yes, it does. And I'm head of security at NHS England. In terms of my career to date, I think we're going to cover that in a bit more detail in some of the questions later on. But ultimately, I started off, what did I do? I'm going back a long way now and I'm old. I started off essentially working as a youth worker when I finished university. I went off and moved into theatre and worked as a sales manager in theatre for a while. After that, I went into recruitment and I was a recruitment consultant. Then I worked in commercial and was essentially in charge of purchasing contracting staff, and then moved into security, and the rest is kind of history.
So Alex?
Hi, my name is Alex Knight. I am a solutions architect at Answer Digital. We're a digital transformation consultancy business with specialist sort of sectors being healthcare and financial services. Prior to working here, I had a 7-year period where I was starting a business, running my own business. And prior to that, I worked for a software development company called Civica, doing sort of housing management software, working as a technical architect eventually there, but went through a number of roles there, working across kind of sales, consultancy, development, and ultimately up to that kind of technical architect position. Again, I think we'll kind of come on to some of those different roles as we go through the questions.
Vandan?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Vandan. I'm currently a data scientist at a company called Data Robot. So my job essentially entails helping companies use AI and ML in their day-to-day businesses.
And we've got Chris from Google on the big screen.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And I'm sorry I can't be there. I'm down south in Windsor at the moment. I'm Chris Code. I left the old grammar school in '95. Does that make me the oldest person on this panel?
Yes. Yeah, I think it might.
Including Mr. Arthur. Oh well. I'm managing director of Google Cloud. I work with big companies, principally retailers, and help them make technology decisions and get the best out of Google. But most of my career has been in technology in some form. Before Google, I ran all the digital businesses for Tesco. That was through COVID, so there's some interesting stories there. And spent about 11 years at Amazon.com before that in Europe and the US. Did various other things before that, but I'm sure we'll come to it.
Excellent. So we'll just go around now and ask various questions. And then, like I said, we'll open it up to you lot as well. So if you've got any questions, make a little note of it. We'll start off with Matt. Obviously, you said that you went into theatre after.
Mm-hmm.
When you were at school, did you have any sort of idea that you'd like to move into the tech industry? When was it in your career where you thought, oh, that's an attractive place to be?
Not at all, simply. When I was at school, when I was in sixth form here, I was the weird odd one out, so to speak. All of my compatriots, they all had plans. One wanted to be a lawyer, one wanted to be a doctor, one wanted to be a surgeon, all this sort of good stuff. So for me, I felt really kind of almost isolated, as I say, like the odd one out. I didn't have that plan. I didn't know what I wanted to do. There was nothing really that interested me. So I guess the message that I'm giving, or the point I'm making here, is that it's all right not to have a plan, right? If you don't know what you want to do, don't push yourself down a path that you may not be able to get out of, if that makes sense, or a direction. Alex will speak about that in a minute, I'm sure. But don't go down a path that'll be difficult to come back round from. So in terms of how I got into tech, it was completely by accident. As I said earlier, I've had a number of different jobs in a number of different areas, but they're all just jobs, they weren't careers. And I kind of fell into what I'm doing now, literally just fell into it. I was working for a company called NHS Connecting for Health about 15 years ago now, maybe a little bit more. And I'd done a good job for one of the directors, and he kind of owed me a favour, and he phoned me up and said, I'm setting up this new team, you interested? I said, yeah, sounds all right, you know, because it was just another job for me. But I loved it. that was the new operational security team, as they call it, and I absolutely fell in love with with what I was doing in cybersecurity. And that is essentially the history. It was very much a case of take that very small job, you know, that operational security at a band 5, which within the NHS is quite a low band, and then work up through the ranks to, as I say, 15 years later, I'm now one of the heads of security. It's not easy to do that, don't get me wrong. I've worked my absolute backside off, but it was, as I say, it was a case of I fell into the job. That's when I found out I had a love for it. And that happened relatively, you know, when I was in my mid to late 20s. So don't feel bad if you haven't got a plan. There will be something that comes out there. The bottom line is, I think your keynote speaker this morning said exactly what I was going to say as well, in that looking around this room, there are going to be industries, there are going to be jobs that you guys are going to be doing that don't exist right now, you know. When Alex and I were sitting up there in the back seats, you know, we were sat there with Nokia 3310s with little black and white screens. Smartphones would never been envisaged.
Steak was cutting edge.
Steak was cutting edge, yes, absolutely. You know, there were no apps, there were nothing like that, you know. So an industry that didn't exist, cybersecurity was in its infancy in those days, you know. It's not what, you know, and then it's taken off. I found it long after it had been, you know, well, it was being built, if that makes sense.
I guess it's a similar question to Chris as well. Did you always want to pursue a career in tech, and then did you sort of have a clear plan mapped out?
No, I wanted to be an astronaut. And I actually still want to be an astronaut. So I'm trying to save up because my old boss, Mr. Bezos, has some rockets. No, like seriously, I wanted to work in space science, and I was good at physics at school. I still have my sixth form physics prize somewhere. I don't know where it is. So I did physics at university, but also then I decided I wanted to be a television presenter instead, because again, when I was at school, I worked on a Yorkshire TV program in the mid '90s, and so when I left university, I worked for the BBC as a consultant, as a way to get into the media. But all the talk at the time, this was the late 90s, early 2000s, was about how the internet was going to change media and how the BBC could invest in that technology. And that started a sort of a career in technology. I then worked for a search engine before Google was even used very much, if you can believe that. And then sort of fell into retail, but again, the tech side. So, no, I didn't have my career planned out. And you're going to hear this like 4 times in this session. Very few jobs, unless you join the army, right? Very few jobs have a clear kind of linear path through a kind of a career. And so I think, you know, if you're going to get something from this session, it's what are the kind of transferable skills, what are the experiences that can be used in a variety of sectors, a variety of jobs. The interesting thing about technology, I think, obviously, this is a truism, is that every sector, every industry, every company is somehow affected by technology. And if you have some technology skills, whether hard skills, like you can write code, or softer skills, you're unlikely to be out of work in the next 30 years. That would be my view. But no clear career plan. And I bet you nobody on this panel had that.
To avoid getting the same answer.
Maybe the teacher. Possibly. Be a teacher or join the army, and then you're not going to be doing it 10 years.
Yeah. To avoid getting the same answer 4 times, then we'll change. We'll go on to Alex. Yeah. With your A-levels and degree, were they sort of in line with a normal progression into tech?
No, very much not. So Matt and I were in the same year at GCSEL and Leeds Grammar as it was. My aim at the time, I was one of those people that clearly annoyed the hell out of Matt because I kind of had a plan and I was going to go and do environmental sciences. That was my kind of plan. And with that in mind, I chose to do biology, chemistry, and geography as my kind of A-levels. I went to Lancaster University, which is a great place to go and do environmental science. And within about 3 weeks of starting the course, if I'd been shown another sample of rock, I think I might have screamed. And I realised at that point that I had gone down the wrong path. I'd done that thing that Matt was talking about of going like, I'm on a path, I need to have a career in mind, and I'd probably gone down a bit of a dead end. And so for me, it was a decision to make of do I carry on with that or do I take the decision to kind of leave and reassess where I'm at? And I took the second option and decided to drop out of university, came back home and ended up, I'd been interested in kind of computing. I'd always been a bit of a kind of computer gamer and interested in that kind of stuff. And I got a job in a local computer shop, just building computers and maintaining and fixing people's computers. Did that for a kind of a year, and then moved through to a company called EMIS, who are a software company, doing sort of installations, doctors' surgeries and that kind of thing. And then decided to go back and do a degree in computer science at Leeds Metropolitan University. And that was kind of my route to getting into IT. So from there, I ended up going into a kind of graduate scheme and whatever you from there. So not something that I'd thought about at school at all. And I guess a bit like everybody else, you kind of muddle your way into it.
So going back to then doing the computer science as your degree as well. Okay, well, keeping on that line then with Vandan. So qualification-wise, what do you think would be a good qualification to have for A-levels and degree, etc.?
Yeah, I guess it comes to initially that point of like, do you have a plan? Most people seem to not. So really doing something that you find interesting, something that you're sort of passionate about, I think is a good starting point. But really, as I think it was Matt said at the beginning, like keeping doors open for yourself. And really the fact that the tech sector is growing so quickly means that doors can open very quickly for you as well. For me personally, like AI and ML is really starting to boom at the minute. And that means that, actually there's a whole slew of new jobs in the space. So if you quickly get up to speed with those skills, then you can very quickly advance. I think it was Chris's point before as well, there is a sort of flip side of that, which is, I see most technology professionals will be somewhere on a scale between sitting in a dark office writing code and, out in the world talking to people, talking to companies. And regardless of where you are on that spectrum, being able to understand people, being able to work with people is always going to be important and is actually going to be much more valuable for you in your career than a specific technology skill, where at the minute, technologies come in and out of fashion over a couple of years.
Right, let's start getting a bit deeper into your actual jobs then. So we'll start with Matthew. What are the key areas of your work that you're working on now?
So I manage a team of people and also do it myself. And ultimately, we are responsible for the cybersecurity aspects of all of the NHS's national systems, right? So I think I've got a question later on when I'll come on to stats and stuff like that, but that's essentially what we do. We look after everything that Alex was talking about, EMIS earlier on, that's used commonly across GP surgeries as a system. We look after all the central stuff that glues the NHS together, so to speak. And in terms of what I do day to day, essentially I consult with these individual services, with these programs internally, to make sure they're building, they're designing, they're running, they're maintaining, and they're closing down all of their systems in the most secure way possible. Essentially, we, as a team, we protect everybody in this hall, everybody in this country's medical data. That's what we do.
What do you think the most interesting parts of your job are?
Most interesting bits, every day is different, right, ultimately. One day I could be woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning because some system's gone down and some clinicians jumping up and down, or another day we could have an incident where we've had a load of patient data go missing. We haven't recently, thank you very much, just to clarify that. But I love the incident management side of things is what I really enjoy. But then on other days, I could be talking to a program, I could be helping them design their infrastructure, design their cloud infrastructure. We could be looking at vulnerabilities and their penetration tests, where we get essentially ethical hackers in to go and hack the crap out of the system, as we like to say, so that we know the vulnerabilities before really bad Russians at the moment come in and do it for us and then steal a load of data. That's one of the things that I really enjoy, but ultimately, for me, it's the size and the scale of the stuff that we're doing. My statistics I have to write down because I can never blooming remember them. But over COVID, we built systems very, very quickly. We built a system that dealt with 85.7 million vaccination appointments for COVID. Our national systems deal with 2 million transactions every hour. In terms of the cybersecurity aspects, 3 billion transactions a day go through our systems and we protect those. In terms of our data processing that we do, in terms of research for universities and all that sort of stuff, 7.6 petabytes of data that we're responsible for protecting. Just one of the systems that I look after deals with 1 billion transactions a month, and that is 4 times larger than the entire UK payment industry. So that's kind of the size and the scale of what we deal with. And trying to keep that available and secure is really blooming hard, to be honest. So, but that's what I love. I love the challenge, and I love the fact that we're working on these big systems that are essentially classed as UK critical national infrastructure. So we have to report to the government, to the National Cyber Security Centre, to MI5 and various other places very blooming regularly on how it's all doing, and that's really exciting for me.
I think it's quite cool as well that the work you're doing sort of affects every single person in the UK.
Absolutely. Hand up if you've got the NHS app on your phone. There you go.
Chris, we'll jump over to you now. So how much of your role is actually tech, and what else do you cover?
My current role is actually pretty tech heavy because every conversation is about making choices of different technologies or helping other companies make choices. But if I think about the last 20 years of my career, most of the jobs I've done have been much more about trying to solve problems with technology, not necessarily deep in the technology itself. So some examples would be, at Amazon, how do you use technology to make it easier for customers to find what they're looking to buy? How do you use technology to make sure your prices are competitive? Through COVID, I worked at Tesco, as I mentioned. How do we deliver as many grocery orders to people who can't or don't want to leave their homes as possible with a fixed amount of people picking orders and delivery vans and so on? All those are technologies, are problems that can be solved with technology. How can you automate processes which are repetitive and boring for human beings? And so, if you need some Fortran, 77 now. But I'm not from a deep technology background. My role today, and actually most of the roles I've had, has been about how can you make good things happen, typically for customers or for business goals, using technology. And that requires some of the hard skills that you'd imagine, sort of analytical skills, numeracy. There's a bias towards sort of mathematical and physical sciences, probably amongst all of us here, but also the ability to communicate, especially to people who don't come from a technology background, but are either consumers or decision makers in those processes. So we're probably going to talk today a little bit about choices coming up for the students watching this. And there probably, if you're thinking about technology as a career, there probably is going to be a bias towards mathematics, computer science, the sciences, engineering, because that teaches you how to make decisions with data. But please do not neglect the ability to persuade people, to influence, to communicate, to evangelize, to show passion, because the leaders in technology have, those skills too.
Thank you. Moving to Alex. So obviously before we were talking about Nokia 3210s and smartphones not existing, and you said that you took 7 years out to start your own business, was it?
Yes.
What was the biggest change in technology from when you left and then coming back into it again?
So when I kind of left technology, I think the biggest thing I found coming back to it 7 years later is a lot of the things that were in their infancy when I was leaving technology were around cloud and the kind of use of cloud technology. That has become totally the mainstream now. Every single sort of service that companies are looking to deliver now will almost always start from what they call cloud native. We don't even consider doing it any other way, unless there's a strong security requirement to do it probably. Most people want to try and utilize these huge kind of scale services that you can get from the likes of Microsoft and Amazon and Google that can provide you with the high availability and the kind of stuff that previously would have taken an awful lot of time and effort to set up and would have cost you an awful lot of money. You can get that stuff almost as a commodity now, and that's been a huge change in what's possible with technology, how quickly you can create services, how quickly you can stand things up, try things, see what works. Previously, you'd had a huge kind of decision to make about whether you were going to invest in this thing and whether you could spin up the technology to actually support it. Nowadays, you can kind of get things into a proof of concept and put them in front of users and actually get them to kind of give you feedback much, much quicker. And I think that's been the huge change over that kind of 7 to 10 year period, really has.
And what kind of things are you working on at the moment?
So at the moment, say Answer Digital are a consultancy business. So we generally try to solve problems for other businesses using the skills and experience of our teams. And we build kind of multidisciplinary teams to go in and solve problems for other organisations. For me at the moment, I've been working on the NHS COVID pass. So my path has actually overlapped with Matt's recently in terms of NHS stuff. We have a huge kind of sector experience in healthcare, so we tend to do a lot of that. COVID pass has been an absolutely fantastic project to work on. It's had that kind of scale that Matt talks about that makes it really exciting. You know, how many people here have produced a COVID pass in order to be able to go on holiday to prove that you've been able to go? Yeah. You know, just about everybody. You know, the service at its peak was producing something like 150 million COVID passes a week. You know, it was a real huge service. But what's been really interesting for me on that programme is that we've been, in the space of 2 years, we've ramped up something, we've maintained it at scale, and now we're in a period where we're starting to kind of tail that off because, you know, nobody's needing that now. There's only a couple of countries that require you to prove your kind of COVID sort of vaccination status now. And so it's been like a really kind of accelerated timeline to see that kind of end-to-end life cycle of a product. And actually now we're kind of, as a solution architect, what we're looking at doing is how do we kind of right-size that off-ramp and what does it look like as we start to shut the program down? You know, how would we mothball this so that we could spin it back up if something happened similar to COVID in the future? But also looking at how do we make best use? We spent an awful lot of taxpayers' money developing that COVID pass. And so one of the real key things out of that is how do we reuse some of that? Are the things that we learned and we developed, bits of technology and infrastructure that we can reuse? How can we repackage that up and use it in another part of the NHS or in a different organisation in government or whatever? Because we've spent your money and my money building that, so let's make the best use out of it in the future.
Well, I think we'll move round to looking at maybe career paths, but now we've looked at that, but now maybe thinking about the actual choices that you lot might be making. Vandan, where you are right now, do you have people working with you a similar background to you? Do you have people working who have had a similar sort of progression path that you have as well?
Yeah, I guess as Chris said, like I think there are a lot of people that come from, you know, a computer science, a physical science. Like for me personally, I come from a physics background. But there are also people who don't. There are also people that don't. So some of my direct colleagues at the minute studied history, some of them studied English. And actually, really, I think that comes back to some of what Chris was saying about the variety. So like Chris, for me in my job, a lot of it is working with organizations to answer questions. So that might be, if I'm working with the NHS, among my patient waiting list, who should we see next? If I'm working with McLaren, it might be on what lap should Lando Norris take a pit stop. And if it's working with a large retail estate agency in London, it's which of all of London's properties is likely to be put on the market next. So whilst, you know, studying physics gives me the ability to try and solve some of those problems, actually, if you've got like diverse backgrounds, then, you know, someone from a history background might be able to give you different input and different perspective to what I can bring personally.
So probably quite a hard one for you then, Matt. When you're looking to employ people, new staff or graduates, what qualifications or what skills are you looking for?
So this is where I give the bad news, right? So experience. Experience is absolutely everything, right? I don't really care whether you've got a degree in cybersecurity. I don't really care whether you've got a degree in computer science or anything like that, although it is a requirement for some of our jobs, so that's a bit weird. But what we need is experience. The number of graduates that I look at on paper and say, do you know what, I really want to meet you, to interview you, but I have very, very specific scoring criteria that are set by, unfortunately, HR, that say you have to have 5 years experience in this and 5 years experience in that. And it's just like, really frustrating at times. So experience is the key thing. So for you guys, right, if you're wanting to get into the area, the question is, how do I get that experience? You know, if no one will take me on without it, how do I get it? It's like, it's a catch-22, isn't it? A couple of routes. So first of all, apprenticeships. And graduate schemes, right? Really good. NHS England run one. You essentially spend 2 years with us as a graduate. You go around lots of different departments, from programming through to cybersecurity, through to project management, through all this sort of good stuff, with the aim that after that 2 years, you pick an area and we give you a job. in it at a band 7, which is about 35,000, which is not bad for 2 years outside of university, to be perfectly honest. So that's one of the key areas, the graduate schemes and apprenticeships and all that sort of stuff. Lots and lots of companies do them. I think Alex's do. I know that Google have quite a few different programs of that nature as well. So that's where I would say is one of the key areas. The second thing, I guess, is look around you. What can you do voluntary or even on a, what's the word I'm looking for? Over the summer or whatever, what can you do? Is there a company that you can go and work with? Is there work shadowing? Is there that kind of work experience opportunity you can get? The third key point that I want to make is make sure you write it all blooming down, right? So the number of people that I know, from circles, and I know what they've done, they don't tell me what they've actually done when they apply for my job, so I can't interview them, right? Your covering letter is more important than your CV, right? Get it all in there, because if I read a covering letter that says, I've done this apprenticeship, I've done this experience, that's transferable skills that give me the opportunity to give you points to bring you on to interview. So that's kind of what the message that I want to give today.
And that's a nice link on to you again, Chris. I know you mentioned the skills already, but do you have anything more to add about what kind of skills do you think that people are important to have in the tech role?
Rather than list just a bunch of skills, I'll probably pick on 2. And the first one is a little bit counter to what we just heard, sort of the importance of experience. And maybe this is truer for people sort of a little further on in their career rather than grads, but I always value over domain experience a demonstrable ability to learn. Because our industry is changing so rapidly, that you come in with a set of specific hard skills and experiences is valuable for about 6 to 12 months. But if you don't have the ability to learn and grow and develop, then you're going to be less valuable as an employee. Now, you can demonstrate that in a bunch of ways, but I would always look for, yes, extracurricular stuff, but intellectual curiosity, and this been followed up. I interviewed not a graduate, but someone coming out of business school a couple of years ago, and she had an arts background, fine arts background, but she was interested in a particular technology, and she taught herself Python, and that was enough for me to sort of be really interested in her, because she'd shown the ability to learn new skills. That would be number 1. Number 2 is a rare commodity, and if when I see it, I grab it. If I'm interviewing people, and that is judgment, high judgment skills. Most decisions can be made with data by experimenting and testing and looking at the results. But some decisions, the data is not available, or it's inconsistent, or it's late, and you have to make a judgment call. And so Amazon used to call this being right a lot, which is a bit of a nuanced, concept. How can you be right a lot? How can you just be correct most of the time? You can learn to be right a lot. You can seek out different opinions to your own. You can talk to people who have a contrary perspective to your own. You can listen before forming an opinion about something. You can be prepared to change your mind with new information. So all those things help you build, I think, good judgment skills. So those would be the 2. Ability to learn and judgment.
Thank you. Alex, back onto you. Obviously, we spoke about 3210, you missing your 7 years,
Yes.
and then coming back. Where do you think the next big sort of area of tech is going to be?
That's a really great question. As Matt alluded to kind of at the start of this, for a lot of you guys in the room today, like the tech jobs of the future possibly don't exist yet. So it may not be that, what I tell you now and what we're talking about today, there might be something else that comes along that kind of changes where the direction of tech is going, and there'll be roles that you guys might be fulfilling that don't exist today. So, that ability to make good judgment calls and to learn new stuff is going to be really important. But I think in the way that the internet has massively changed things that are possible with technology, I think AI and machine learning and that kind of thing is probably the next big step in IT. It will just completely transform the way that we can do those kind of repetitive tasks, things that humans get bored of and things that humans don't enjoy doing, and actually kind of take those out of the need for people to do them and give them to kind of robots and AIs to do. There's been a huge amount of talk recently about ChatGPT. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, has heard of it. Probably 2 or 3 of you at least will have used it to do your homework at some point. But that's going to change everything in teaching, because suddenly teachers are going to have to make assessments about, well, has the student really learned this, and how do I assess whether a student actually knows what they're telling me is in this essay, or have they just got an AI to do it for them? And so I think AI is going to just change everything for not just in tech, but in other industries as well. And that leads through to that comment that we said earlier. In the future, almost every job is going to be a tech job to some degree, whether or not you're working in a business helping to define the business's strategy and sales strategy and things like that. All of these jobs are going to need you to have an understanding of how can I use the technology available to help me do my job. And so I think, there is no harm in learning what the tech is and how it works, because it will stand you in good stead whatever direction your career takes you.
As long as you're not cheating on your homework.
We're just jealous.
The final one from me is for Vandan. If you were to give one key bit of advice for someone moving into the tech industry, what would that be?
I think a lot of it's already been covered, which is, take the opportunity to try new things and learn. I'll flip it around and try and be a bit more practical and sort of say, well, great, fine. This is a thing that I need to be able to do, but how do I actually become better at learning? And I think for me, university, if that's the path that you're wanting to take, it's obviously not the only path, it is a really great opportunity to do that. So, starting off with lectures, I'm sure for lots of you, lectures weren't the optimal way of studying. You really get to develop sort of what is right for you, what works for you, because ultimately being able to do that sort of independent sort of studying is going to be incredibly important, because once you're sort of between jobs in your 30s, then actually what the next decision is and what you need to learn, no one's going to tell you. You've got to go figure it out yourself. So for me, that's one piece of it. And the other piece that helps with that learning is putting yourself in new situations. So I think Matt talked about it as well in terms of apprenticeships and internships. If you're doing a 3-year course at uni, if you're doing a 4-year course at uni, you've got 2, 3, 4 summers where you can go and just try new jobs, try new things. And that's a really good opportunity to find out what does work for you and what doesn't work for you. And even if it's something that you come back to, 10 years later, at least you'll have a bit more understanding of what that's really like.
You're doing, Alex. Right, now it's your turn. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? All right, for Chris, if you probably didn't hear that.
Can you repeat the question? I can't hear or see the audience.
Yeah, so the question was, if the candidate had 5 years experience in one company and then another candidate had 1 year experience in 5 companies, which one would you rather have?
I will be looking for, 5 years experience in one company or 1 year experience in 5 companies?
Yes.
Right. Well, there would be a hygiene question first, which is, why is this person leaving their job every year? Are they stealing or doing bad things? If there was, so that would be a bit of a red flag, frankly. That said, if you got over that hump, if there was good reason for it, maybe these are all startups that didn't work out, which is fine. I don't think, the question is, has this person taken ownership for something? Have they made a difference? Have they delivered something which has, delivered meaningful results? So that they've been in one company for 5 years, or even 20 years, or they've been in 10 companies for a couple of years, each. I don't think makes necessarily a difference if they've been able to, if they can demonstrate they've delivered something valuable and meaningful and grown and been promoted and whatever. But there are sort of career hoppers around who sort of change every 12 to 18 months. And before you get into the detail of what they've been doing, you would ask them the question, what's going on?
Any of you three got anything to add?
For me, that's kind of, we're a consulting business. What we tend to do so in our business, we work with other organisations on 1 year contracts, whatever they might be. There are a lot of people who work independently as consultants, and they'll be brought in on a 1 year contract. And so we quite often see candidates who've been working as independent consultants where they've changed jobs every 6 months because they got a 6-month contract with this particular organisation, 12 months with this one. And so we quite often see people with that very kind of cherry-picked sort of CV pattern. And what we would be looking at, I guess, is, again, very similar to what Chris was saying. We'd be looking at what was the project that you were on? Did that project have a successful outcome? You know, even if you were only there for 6 months, in those 6 months, did you deliver change? Did you deliver an outcome that was tangible, that we can kind of evidence that you did, and that you've made a difference and demonstrated some skills? And then we'd be fine with that. You know, there's no issue with somebody moving jobs because that's the nature of consulting.
I think the other interesting angle to that question as well, which is a really great one, I'm glad you didn't come to me first off, to be perfectly honest, but is as somebody that, you know, as an interviewer and as an employer, you also have to look at whether or not somebody's institutionalised. So if they've been there, maybe not 5 years, but if they've been there 15, 20 years, the question is, why are they leaving now, right? Are they institutionalised somewhere else and eventually they've just given up, they're bored, whatever, and they want a change? Fine, you can talk about that. But ultimately, for somebody, especially in my industry, it's like you get so used to the way this organisation does things. After 15, 20 years, you might not be able to move and flip out and change to the way that the new organisation does, if that makes sense.
This question was for Matt, and it was about their cybersecurity and was it how to keep on top of everything? Yeah, how to keep
so
current.
how do you keep on top of unknown threats? And it's not easy, to be perfectly honest. You're in a constant state of maintenance. You've got to look at stuff all the time. It's no good building a solution today, making it all secure, making it all great, because tomorrow there'll be a new threat. We'll find a vulnerability in this cloud software that we're using, or this, or the new Windows vulnerability come out. You've got to be doing stuff, patching and doing it all and regularly. Within the NHS, we have ongoing regular assessment, so we require a penetration test of all our systems every year for a start, along with mitigations that come out of that, so we can make sure that they're all up to speed. But we have a massive amount of monitoring as well. We use a product called Splunk, which I think all of my panelists will know and love. But that's
a strong word.
Yes, essentially it's a big data querying service. And it's absolutely brilliant. It's hard to understand and hard to use, but it's really good at doing what it does once it's configured properly. And we tune that and we program it to look for certain things, and it looks for anomalies and all that sort of good stuff within the patterns of data in ingress and egress that we have, allowing our first responders and our instant response teams to go in and have a look and see what's actually happening. Does that kind of answer your question? I think it's an ongoing maintenance thing, basically. You cannot just rest on your laurels and say it was built securely from the start, because it's not going to be. A story when, in the early days of Windows XP, right, you could go and build it and put it online, it's fine. Now, Windows XP, in some instances, required you to be connected to the internet to download some immediate patch files. One of my former colleagues, ran a little experiment about 10 years or so now. So this is when Windows XP was still in support and live and all that sort of stuff. That instance, that machine of Windows XP, when we were installing the operating system, was being hit by cyber attacks before we'd even got the patches downloaded, right? That's how bad kind of things were and how bad things still are. Every system is being, hit constantly. It's how you actually go about, building it secure to start with, and then ongoing security maintenance.
I mean, I guess it's applicable for all four of you. How do you keep current with your technological skills?
Yeah, I was going to kind of lean into some of what Matt was saying. So my job as a solutions architect is that piece that Matt talks about helping to make sure that solutions are, we talk about secure by design. And so we're always looking at kind of how can we take an approach to this solution that will try to anticipate threats. And we use kind of what's called a zero trust model a lot of the time, which says like every time this service gets called, I'm never going to trust that you've told me previously who you are at every level that you go. So, you authenticate once and then I need to authenticate you again. And we'll kind of keep checking so that even if you breach my first line of defense, there's 2 or 3 other lines of defense behind that just makes it infinitely harder for somebody to try and get into that system. And so that's the kind of thing that we would be looking at doing with my company when we're doing those kind of solution designs make sure that we've considered that multi-level defence in there.
Yeah. It's all in the round. Just
It is.
coming off the back of that point as well, is there are three kind of distinct areas that we look at within the industry: people, process, and technology. So the technology is deliberately at the end, right? Because first off, you start with your people. You make sure you've got the right people working on stuff that they're trustworthy, reliable, if that makes sense, especially when they're working on some important systems. So all of my staff, for example, have to go through government security clearance. So, just so that we can prove that they're properly trustworthy. In terms of the process, making sure all of your processes for your design life cycle are good and are right, so that you've not got someone just making it up as they go along. And then obviously the technology being the thing that we're focusing on, that is the kind of the last thing in the lines of defence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the thing about people as well is that, actually it's very easy to focus on, is this piece of technology as designed secure? But actually, have you taken your eye off the fact that a person could walk in, they might have a password for that system because you gave them access. If that person is bribed, corrupted in some way and just walks in and downloads your data, it doesn't matter how secure your system was, you gave them a password. So it's not just about focusing on the technology. When you want to make something secure, you've got to think about the whole solution. How does that work? Who has access? How do they get access? How is that audited and all that kind of thing as well?
We've just under 4 minutes left, so any...
Questions are coming now.
Yeah, they are. Toby, we'll go with you.
Do you have any doubts over the evolution of AI in the next couple of years?
Maybe.
I guess I'd ask what you mean by doubts, but I think, sorry, the question for Chris was, do I have any doubt, or do we have any doubts over the evolution of AI in the next few years? So a few different angles
How's your crystal ball, Chris?
Few different angles to play the question from. Do we think AI is going to be ubiquitous across all industries in the next 5-10 years? Absolutely, it already is in lots of cases. Do I think AI is going to be able to do everything? No, nor should it be. And that's where this piece around monitoring for security perspective is equally important from an AI perspective. You don't want to just sort of leave something running. You should be checking it to make sure that it is still performing as you expect. It is still producing results as you expect. But most importantly is that ultimately most of the training data and most of the examples that we've got historically contain bias. So going and inspecting that bias and the ethical side of AI is incredibly important going forwards, particularly as it becomes much more important. So this is a space where we actually hire philosophists to go and think about the ethical AI side, and it's one that's really apparent. You can very quickly get ChatGPT to start being hugely racist or sexist or whatever it is, and that's ultimately because so much of the training data out there has that kind of bias in it. So in terms of doubts, yeah, absolutely, there are so many things wrong with AI, but that's why you need to be vigilant to that and start thinking critically about the systems that you're putting in place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway. I think AI is going to change what is valued in kind of roles a little bit, and you can get AIs now to kind of write code for you that's very, very good in most cases, and probably 90% as good as you'd get from a really experienced developer. So what I think is going to become increasingly important is that you guys have the critical thinking skills to be able to question what you're being delivered and how that's coming to you, and is there a better way of doing that, and how can I leverage the AI but put the right guide rails around that so that we address things like bias and security and things that maybe the AI can still get wrong.
I mean, unfortunately, we're out of time now. But oh yeah, Chris, do you have anything to add on the AI question?
I was going to make a reference to Terminator films and Skynet. I think that, look, I think one interesting question. I'm less concerned about AI being some kind of existential danger to humanity. I do think there's a fair question to say, what are the implications of AI on the employment of people who have a high school education and don't go on to further education? And the example I give is actually a US example. The number one job for high school grads who didn't go on to higher education, for men certainly, is truck driving in the US. and with automated driving and the application of AI for transportation, that I think there is a public policy question there. That said, I could argue the other side, which is I worked at Amazon for 11 years. We invented tons of technology and automated a ton of stuff, and we went from 100,000 people to 1.5 million jobs created. So that's the counter argument. But there are some interesting public policy questions about AI and employment.
Can we give our panelists a round of applause?